Hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the RWSN webinar on JMP methods for monitoring SDG targets for wash-in households. Part 1 focused on drinking water, and part 2 will focus on sanitation and hygiene. SDG target 6.2 addresses both sanitation and hygiene, and this is a big step forward as hygiene was omitted from the MDGs. The target calls for access to adequate and equitable hygiene and sanitation for all, and includes an explicit reference to ending open defecation and paying special attention to the needs of women and girls and those in vulnerable situations. UN member states selected 2 indicators to track global progress towards this target, one for sanitation and one for hygiene. Let's start with sanitation. Indicator 6.2.1a is the population using safely managed sanitation services. This indicator builds on the old MDG indicator, which is already well established, a population using an improved sanitation facility. It excludes those facilities which are shared with other households and introduces a new requirement that the excreta must either be safely disposed of in situ or transported and treated off-site. As with drinking water, the JMP uses a ladder to benchmark and compare service levels across countries. We continue to monitor the proportion of the population who do not use toilets and practice open defecation, and those that use unimproved facilities, such as a pit latrine with no slab or a hanging latrine. For SDG reporting, the population using an improved sanitation facility are now divided into 3 categories. If facilities are shared with other households, we call this a limited service, and facilities that are not shared count as basic service. In order to meet the new SDG benchmark of safely managed services, excreta must either be safely disposed of in situ or transported and treated off-site. The diagram on the right shows the 3 main pathways to safely managed sanitation, which will be described in more detail later. The first step in the JMP methodology is to determine the types of sanitation facility that people use. The improved unimproved technology classification was used throughout the MDG period and is now quite well established. Improved facilities include flush or pour flush to piped sewer systems, septic tanks or pit latrines, and pit latrines with slabs, composting toilets and container-based systems. Pit latrines without slabs or hanging latrines and bucket latrines are unimproved, and we have a separate category for open defecation. Each time we receive a new dataset, we add them to the JMP country file and match them against the international standard classification. In this example, from Sri Lanka, you can see how the original national definitions on the left correspond with the JMP categories on the right. The improved ones are shaded in green, and you can see that the vast majority of people in Sri Lanka use improved facilities, 98.2%. The summary at the top breaks these down into 3 main categories: sewer connections, septic tanks, and other improved. Once we've extracted data from all of the available national data sources, we use a simple linear regression to generate estimates for all years in the reference period. That's 2000 to 2017. In this example from Indonesia, you can see that we have a large number of data points, but some countries have far fewer. For sanitation, we produce separate estimates for improved, which includes shared facilities, and for basic, which does not. And in this example, you can see that despite rapid growth in improved facilities, a significant proportion continue to share sanitation facilities, especially in urban areas. We also produce estimates for open defecation, and in Indonesia, we see a clear downward trend in both urban and rural areas. Our national estimates are the weighted average of urban and rural estimates. We can use these estimates to track progress towards the elimination of open defecation. That means less than 1%. This graph shows the population practicing open defecation in 2017 and the annual rate of change between 2000 and 2017. Countries in the upper right triangle are on track to eliminate open defecation. Those in the yellow triangle are not progressing fast enough, while those in the orange zone, open defecation is actually increasing. Nepal is one of the few countries which is not only on track for elimination at national level, but also in rural areas and among the poorest wealth quintile in rural areas. We also track progress on basic services. This chart shows those countries recording the biggest percentage point increases in basic services since 2000, often from low starting points. 7 countries have increased coverage by more than 1/3, and in the federal states of Micronesia, coverage increased from just 25% in 2000 to 88% in 2017. Our global inequalities database now includes estimates disaggregated by subnational region and by wealth quintile for around 100 countries, which we use to analyse progress in reducing inequalities. For example, this chart shows changes in basic sanitation coverage in urban areas and changes in the gap in coverage between the richest and the poorest wealth quintiles between 2000 and 2017. While the majority have increased urban coverage and appear in the green quadrants, in those on the right-hand side, the gap in coverage between the rich and the poor has decreased, while in those on the left, it has increased. For example, Cambodia increased basic sanitation coverage from 46% to 96% and reduced the gap between richest and poorest by 60 percentage points. Meanwhile, Mozambique increased coverage from 32% to 52%, but over the same period, the gap between the richest and the poorest increased by 30 points. We can also track rates of progress towards universal access to basic services. This graph shows that just 40 out of 152 countries are on track to achieve more than 99% coverage of basic sanitation by 2030. Furthermore, if we look at rates of progress in rural areas and among the poorest rural wealth quintiles, we see that progress is much slower. In order to assess whether sanitation services are safely managed, we first need to understand the types of improved facilities people use and whether they use sewer connections or on-site facilities such as septic tanks or pit latrines. The bottom of this chart shows the proportion of the population using each type in 2017, and the top shows the percentage point change since 2000. While sewer connections dominate in 5 out of the 8 regions, septic tanks and latrines dominate in sub-Saharan Africa, Oceania, and Central and Southern Asia. In fact, in least developed countries as a whole, most of the growth between 2000 and 2017 has been in on-site sanitation rather than sewer connections. There are essentially 3 main pathways to safely manage sanitation. For households using on-site facilities, there are 2 options. Excreta could be treated and disposed of in situ in septic tanks with an appropriate leach field or in latrine pits that are covered and left undisturbed when full. Alternatively, excreta from septic tanks and pit latrines can be periodically removed and treated off-site at facilities designed for fecal sludge. For households using sewer connections, excreta should be conveyed with wastewater through sewer lines and treated off-site at wastewater treatment plants. Many countries do not yet have systems in place for routine monitoring and reporting on safe management of excreta, so the JMP draws this information from a range of different data sources. Let's have a look at the different types of data available. Where available, the JMP collects data on whether sanitation facilities are effectively containing and treating waste. The WHO Sanitation and Health Guidelines include detailed sanitary inspection forms for different types of facilities. Countries like Japan, France, and Ireland conduct periodic surveys to assess whether on-site sanitation facilities meet basic design standards and whether they are functioning properly or presenting a risk to human health. Household surveys and censuses occasionally include information on containment, for example septic tanks discharging to open drains or latrines that are full or overflowing. Administrative reports may also include information on the proportion of facilities meeting basic design standards at the time of installation, but detailed technical inspections to establish whether facilities are still functioning properly and effectively containing and treating waste in situ remain relatively rare. Household surveys increasingly include questions on whether septic tanks and pit latrines have ever been emptied and where the contents were emptied to. If they have never been emptied, or the sludge has been removed and buried in a covered pit, then the JMP counts them as safely managed. But if the sludge has been emptied and placed in an uncovered pit, or open ground, or a water body, or elsewhere, then these are counted as unsafely managed. If sludge has been removed by a service provider, then this can potentially be safely managed if additional information is available on fecal sludge treatment. But this information cannot be collected from households. The JMP combines data from household surveys with data from administrative sources on the availability of desludging services and the availability of fecal sludge treatment plants, or wastewater treatment plants, designed to receive fecal sludge. However, information on fecal sludge treatment is currently only available for a very small number of countries. Increasingly, local and national governments are compiling data on the proportion of the population receiving fecal sludge emptying services. This comes from the service providers. And the volumes of sludge delivered to treatment plants. This comes from treatment plant operators. These data can be used to estimate the proportion of sludge emptied by service providers that is actually delivered to treatment plants. Finally, the JMP collects information on the type and level of treatment provided. There are a wide range of different treatment technologies used around the world, but these can be classified into primary treatment, that's the separation of liquids and solids, secondary treatment, to remove organic matter, and tertiary treatment, to remove other compounds. For the purposes of global monitoring, secondary level treatment and above is considered to be safely managed. In the last JMP report, we estimated that just 45% of the global population used safely managed sanitation in 2017. This chart shows that while 82% used improved facilities, that's the old MDG indicator, 8% were shared with other households, which means that 74% used at least a basic sanitation service. Among these, 39% used sewer connections and 34% used on-site facilities. 31% used sewer connections from which wastewater was treated, and 14% used on-site facilities from which excreta were safely disposed of in situ. But there were insufficient data to estimate the global population using on-site facilities from which excreta were emptied and treated off-site. The 45% considered safely managed is simply the sum of the 31% with wastewater treated and the 14% safely disposed of in situ. Estimates for safely managed sanitation were available for 94 countries, areas and territories in 6 out of the 8 SDG regions, representing just over half of the global population, 54%. As you can see, all regions have made progress since 2000, but coverage varies widely and remains below 50% in 3 out of the 6 regions. Last but not least, the JMP also tracks progress on hygiene, and we have developed a new service ladder for SDG reporting. The new SDG indicator 6.2.1b is the population with a handwashing facility with soap and water available at home, which the JMP calls a basic service. If households have a handwashing facility on premises which lacks either soap or water, we call that a limited service, and we also track the proportion of the population with no handwashing facility at all. It's important to note that handwashing facilities may be fixed or mobile, and this could include a sink with a tap or a bucket with a tap, tippy taps and jugs or basins designated for hand washing. The definition of soap includes bar soap, liquid soap, powder detergent and soapy water, but it doesn't include ash, soil, sand or other traditional hand washing agents, which are counted as a limited service. Direct observation of hand washing facilities has been included as a standard module in MIPS and DHS since 2009. Direct observation of hand washing is obviously different, and people behave differently when being observed, but the presence of a hand washing facility with soap and water available has been shown to be a reasonable proxy for hand washing. Enumerators ask households to show them where members of the household most often wash their hands and record the type of facility and the presence of soap and water. In the 2019 Progress Update, estimates were available for just 78 countries, representing about 52% of the global population. These were mostly low and middle income countries, and many high income countries still lack data on hygiene. On this basis, we estimated that 60% of the global population had basic hand washing facilities at home in 2017. This means that 3 billion people still lack basic hand washing facilities, and among these 1.6 billion had limited facilities, lacking soap or water, and 1.4 billion had no facility at all. Estimates were available for 3 out of the 8 SDG regions and range from about 25% in sub-Saharan Africa to 77% in Northern Africa and Western Asia. All of our reports and country files are available to download from the JMP website, washdata.org, along with interactive data visualization tools which allow users to explore our global databases and to create, edit download and share bespoke charts and data tables for countries and indicators of interest. We'll be presenting these in more detail in the next webinar. You may be aware that the JMP not only monitors WASH in households, but also in schools and in healthcare facilities, and you can find our recommended core questions for each of these settings on the website. The JMP published reports on both healthcare facilities and households in 2019, but we are moving to a cycle of putting out reports on schools and healthcare facilities in even years and households in odd years. The country consultations for schools and healthcare facilities are ongoing, and we will release updated estimates for schools and healthcare facilities later this year. We will launch country consultations on households towards the end of this year and release the next household update in 2021. Thank you for listening. This is my last slide, so let's have a break here and take some questions.